Lord God, I lift up today's message as we open up your word and also just look at where we as a people have come from in recent history and where we're headed to in present and near future. It's all past, present, and future to you simultaneously, God. You have it all worked out, God. We trust in you. Lord, we know the end of the story because you've revealed it to us in Revelation. And God, that ultimately we will be under the reign of Jesus Christ himself. That millennial reign we look forward to, where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And then we'll experience the joy of being with God the Father in our new Zion here on earth as we reign as priests and priestesses and as we deliver those leaves of healing from the tree of life to all the nations. Amen. Well, that was exciting just talking about that. Because right now we're going to kind of talk about the opposite of that. We are in a series called Detecting Falsehoods in our society and even in our church. And we've gone through a lot of deep topics, and we are still, in a way, kind of in the mire of that, some deep topics. Again, I just want to say that this series has required a lot of prayer and preparation on my part, and it's only because I feel like the Lord has called me to preach these things that I am obedient to it, because I'd much rather just go to one of the gospel chapters and preach directly from the Bible, but it's also been a time of learning for myself, and I hope that it's informative to you. To help inform us on how we can be the light in the world today. Okay, that's really what we're going for, is fulfilling our mission to be that light of Jesus to our friends, our family, our community, our coworkers, and that's not easy to do. So today we're talking about the topics of communism and critical race theory and socialism, and all kind of wrapped up in Marxism. So wow. Hold on, because it's going to be a mouthful. So we spent quite a bit of time kind of setting up the stage with materialism and scientism, and I forgot what we talked about last week just now. That's funny. Huh? Epistemology, right? Thank you. And that atheism has really grown out of all these things, but almost in response to, those things really developed the modern worldview, but we're in the postmodern worldview now, which was really a response to all of that, saying, well, if logic and reason has just gotten us wars and conflicts and death, then maybe we need to 180, flip the script on that of postmodernism, which is relativism, which is I can believe what I want to believe and you can believe what you want to believe. Well, we're going to back up just a little bit in time, because all of that, I believe, really kind of got started with Darwinian theory in 1860s. But before that, we had the Marxist movement, I would say, starting with the Communist Manifesto. And that was in the 1830s. And that started, I would say, a whole nother parallel track of thought of Marxism and communism that still impacts our world today. And so it's still important to know about these things. It's not directly related to postmodernism, but as we're going to find, the two kind of converge under socialism later on. Okay, so that's why this is important. And so I'm saying that atheism was a big part of creating communism, and communism is itself atheistic. And from that, we get a lot of attitudes, and the means will reach the end of racism or genocide or even democide, which I learned a word this week, which is governments killing their own people. And so racism is just one small part of that. And I'm not saying that all racism comes from communism, obviously, but I'm saying that that mode of thinking lends itself well towards racism, which of course we see in things like the Holocaust, right, where you have dictators or totalitarian governments just deciding that it serves them well to be against some race or culture or group of people. But we can also very closely map a current issue, which is critical race theory, to Marxism. And so we'll get to that, and then also into the kind of the modern movement of socialism, and these things working themselves into our present day society and even to our present day churches. All right, so how was that for an introduction? And so all this kind of begins with Karl Marx, and from that we have this general term Marxism, or at this point in time we can specifically say economic Marxism. But before we can understand what Marxism was really trying to be a proponent of, let's first try to understand Marx himself a little bit better, okay? And so he lived that period of time, and most people don't realize, although when he wrote his papers, he was writing it from an atheistic view. He was actually born to a family of rabbis. He had Jewish heritage by birth and by religion, and so his family were active, following the Judeo practices and worshiping God. At some point, though, his father, Heinrich, maybe because of pressure within business in Germany or whatever reason, they became Christian, and Karl Marx was actually baptized as a Lutheran when he was 6 years old. And so he very well should have known a lot about the Bible, about God, about even Jesus Christ. I assume that he went through some confirmation classes, catechism. I don't know exactly when he became atheistic. I didn't research that, but he is not writing from an ignorant point of view. Okay, he's someone who had a taste of the goodness, come taste and see, and then decided to spit it out. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we look at his life and his writings. He came to the point of saying, this is one of his quotes, that religion is the opium of the people. It is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition. And so he was basically saying, as an atheism, I don't believe in any of this, and this is just, religion and faith is just a construct of humanity trying to fill a void, trying to create a soul where really none exists, right? It's kind of like a solution without a problem kind of thing. And so that was one of his more famous quotes, that religion is an opium to the people. Here's another quote about religion. He says, if people are to know and to understand the real world, they must give up superstitious beliefs because they have a narcotic effect on the mind. Okay, so he was definitely advocating that we not have any religion in both our personal lives and then later in our government lives, I would say. And so the Communist Manifesto follows that. Communism followed that. Communism was very atheistic, and not just against Christians, but against religion, against God. But it's one thing in my mind, it's one thing to be against religion. It's another thing to set yourself up as God. Like, that's even a greater offense in my mind. And that's really what communism was seeking to do. They didn't want people worshiping different gods, or Yahweh especially. They wanted people to, respect the government as their God, as their provider, as the end of all things. So it was really more than just atheism. It was really anti-religion. It was really anti-God. And to get a better feel for this, if we look at his early life, in his teens and his 20s, before the Communist Manifesto, we really see this come through, his disdain for religion, not just his apathy towards religion. He was actually a playwright. He wrote some plays and some poems. I didn't know this until I'm doing this research. Probably his most popular writing was a play called The Fiddler. And The Fiddler is about a guy who plays a fiddle in order to kind of summon the powers of the devil to become more powerful. And here's a quote from that. It says, "Till hearts bewitched, till senses reel, with Satan I have struck my deal. He chalks the signs, beats time for me. I play the death march, fast and free." Okay, so he's in this play, this character, the fiddler, he's making a deal with the devil, literally, to gain more power on the earth. I don't know the play, I don't know to what end, but that's kind of concerning. And here's probably his most famous poem, a quote from it, and the poem is called The Pale Maiden. It says, "Thus heaven I've forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell." And again, I don't know much about the poem, but I feel like this is kind of like a mistress, or someone who's a lover of the devil. But thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. And when you realize that he had a relationship with God, you almost kind of hear himself coming through that, right? Through that pale maiden. But actually his most famous quote was one that didn't come from him in terms of anti-religion. It came from a good friend of his, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And in the play called Faust, he quotes a character named Mephistopheles, who is actually predates this play. It's kind of a cultural folklore symbol of the devil within the German culture. He quotes this from the play. It says, I am the spirit that negates, and rightly so, for all that comes to be deserves to perish wretchedly. 'Twere better nothing would begin. Thus everything that your terms, sin, destruction, evil, represent, that is my proper element. This very much rings of the Bible saying that the devil is here to steal, kill, and destroy. He says that I am the spirit that negates anything that's been created, anything that's good, right? And the things you call sin, destruction, and evil, those are the things I represent. That's who I am, right? Just sends chills down my spines. And it's been said that he would chant this, a little bit easier translation, everything that exists deserves to perish, coming from that line. For all that comes to be deserves to perish wretchedly. Apparently he would just chant this as like a motto, and everything that exists deserves to perish. And so Karl Marx, for some reason, was not just about creating a better utopian society. He believed that first, in order to get there, that everything that's been established has to be torn down, burned down, right? The level playing field. And that's really what influences Communist Manifesto. And all this from someone who history looks at as an economist. He's famous. Communist Manifesto is taught in economics class and governance classes, but he was writing from an atheistic philosophical perspective. So he really didn't have any, I don't know what his education was. I'm sorry, I didn't research all aspects of him, but he himself was destitute and poor, even though he came from, on both sides, his parents and also his wife's parents, I believe, were very wealthy to-do people. And yet, his personal life was in complete disorder. I'm told that he never bathed, and so his body was just full of sores. And they were always begging for money to get by. He had like 6 kids that he was not supporting. They lived together, but 4 of them died before he or his wife died. I don't know exactly when, but he also had a illegitimate child with a housekeeper that he rejected, and a friend ended up taking that child. And so he was not someone that you would model your life after or your economics after. Instead, he expected other people to take care of him. So again, not my kind of economist. And then he wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1948. And this is really, it really boils down to conflict theory. And we'll talk about that in a second. And his motto at the end of the Communist Manifesto, his call to action was, "Workers of the world, unite." Okay, so he was, throughout his life, calling a rally of the poor and the destitute, what they called the proletarian in the manifesto, to join together and overthrow the forces that are oppressing him. them. All right, so conflict theory. This is basically a term that kind of sums up the theories of Karl Marx, in which different groups in society compete over limited resources. So this is where we kind of get the term the haves and the have-nots, or the oppressed and the oppressors. He was always looking at situations and putting them into the two categories of those who have and those who have not. And in his Communist Manifesto, he referred to the have-nots as the proletariat and the haves as the bourgeoisie. Don't try to spell that word. I hope I'm saying it right. He saw history through a theory that has come to be called historical materialism theory, that throughout history there's always been a competition for resources, and there's always a class that is kind of dominating those markets, those industries, the nature, society, and then there's a class that is struggling to survive. And so he had kind of three different phases of history worked out. One was the prehistoric competition for resources, prehistory, so kind of alluding to evolution. Even though evolution came out in the 60s, he was saying that there's always been a competition for resources, and the strong will survive, is kind of what he was saying. That we've come to where we are because of these competitions for resources. The feudal system, I remember through the Dark Ages particularly, you had the wealthy landowners, the lords, the dukes, whoever, that owned huge tracts of land, and they would have all these serfs and peasants living on the land that would develop the land, grow the crops, take care of all the herds. But it all belonged to the lord, right, the landowner. And so they were just kind of struggling to survive with whatever the owner would allow them to keep. Okay, so he saw that as the second major wave, which probably lasted, a good portion of history. I don't know, but the Dark Ages is a broad period of history. And then in his modern time, he saw the next major conflict going on as the laborers and the capitalists. The capitalists being the ones that are the business owners, the wealthy individuals that own the factories, that control the trade markets. And then you have the working class, the poor laborers who, again, are just struggling to survive. And so he wrote the Communist Manifesto with the idea that in order for things to become better for the common man, that had to be leveled, that there could not be this conflict and this struggle between the haves and the have-nots. And so the main points of the manifesto are this: that there was a class struggle between workers and capitalists, and that they had to abolish the private ownership of the means of the production, so the factories, the resources, the shipping, the supply chain, all that kind of stuff. Anything that was critical to the means of production, that private ownership of that had to be abolished. And then there had to be a revolution by the proletariat, the have-nots, to overthrow that capitalist system by force. Okay? And then from that, arising from that proletariat force, there would become a dictator. And this was seen as a temporary solution. Kind of like in Star Wars, where Palpatine's like, I'll become supreme chancellor for a while to get past this rebellion, and then I'll give back the power to the Senate, right? I just said that surprisingly well. Y'all should give me credit for that, because I thought for sure I was going to trip all over that. And so it's kind of like that. They saw it as a temporary dictatorship until the new classless society and new form of government could come to power. All right, so already kind of a flawed theory if anybody knows anything about how the nature of people and how power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, that kind of thing. And then that in the end, there would be a centralized state government where they would manage all aspects of economy, banking, transportation, and industry, and everything will be peaches and ice cream, right? But his call to action was always revolution. Revolution, he said that socialism cannot be brought into existence without a revolution, without that proletariat rising up and taking over the capitalists. Okay, so I found an interesting sermon by Martin Luther King Jr. on this very topic. It really validated that I was preaching something worthy of preaching if Martin Luther King preached on it. This is from a 1953 sermon, so early in his career. And the main 3 points are that communism leaves out God and Christ. It's very secular, materialistic, even anti-God. So therefore, right off the bat, Christians have to have a problem with it, right? Second, the methods of communism are diametrically opposed to Christianity. So I'm just quoting from his sermon here. Since for the communists there is no divine government, no absolute moral order. You can also infer relativism from that. No fixed, immutable principles. Force, violence, murder, and lying are justifiable means to the millennial end. Lenin said, we must be ready to employ tricking, deceit, and law-breaking withholding and concealing the truth. And the fact that he did that and that his followers did that is merely a matter of history. Remember reading a book about Joseph Stalin? People would be arrested in the middle of the night just because someone accused them of something. And then finally, in the third place, that the end of the communism is the state. The state is the supreme being in communism. Man has to be a servant, dutiful and submissive to the state, and that state is omnipotent and supreme. So there's a quick sermon by Martin Luther King, or a quick version of it. And really, part of the problem, interesting alignment problems there. Part of the problem is that communism, I mean, in theory, it sounds good. It's for the benefit of everybody. But in reality, those dictators don't want to give up control, or a communist government itself becomes too centralized and too few people have power. And it ends up being a totalitarian government where it's all about the betterment of the people, and that no means to the end is out of bounds, is too far, too much. And so from a relatively small number of leaders in history, we can account for Marxism being responsible for over 100 million deaths just in the last couple of centuries. Okay, 100 million deaths, many of those just civilians or peasants. Many of them not dying as a result of war, but rather a result of mismanagement. Those resources that were promised didn't make it to them, right? And so Mao Zedong of China, 47 million people under his leadership died. Wow. Of course, we recognize these names, Hitler, Stalin, and Lenin, and we think of Russia and Germany and those red states. But there's many, many more, and it continues on. The Kim dynasty is currently in power still in North Korea. And I don't know necessarily about the current Kim, but I think his dad or grandpa was responsible for over 1 million deaths of North Koreans. You know, so it's that same mentality of you're in control, you know, nothing else matters. So in the book, The Devil and Karl Marx by Dr. Paul Kingor, he writes that a legacy over 100 million, not to mention the robbing of so many basic liberties and the incalculable harm to so many souls, has been nothing short of diabolical, truly a satanic scourge, a killing machine, and it plagues us to this day. Okay? So, you know, I grew up at the end of the Cold War. I was a child in the 80s when I saw on the news, you know, Mikhail Gorbachev and Reagan working out the peace agreement, the disarmament. When I saw on TV the bringing down of the Berlin Wall, and I was not old enough to really understand all those things, but I was old enough to pick up on the fact that it was monumental and that people were watching it intently. You know, the end of the Cold War. And so from my perspective, growing up, to me it seems like communism was defeated, right? It failed. The experiment is over. So as an economic system, yeah, maybe we've seen, or maybe it's been proven that it's failed. As a world power, has it been defeated? Well, yeah, I mean, Hitler's Germany was defeated, and Russia as a communist state, although they continue to rear their head, you know, we've seen that collapse of communism there. So sort of, it's been defeated. But as an ideology, as a Marxist ideology, it's still very much alive and well, and it's because it's really hard to kill an idea, and especially one that in ideally sounds okay, right? It's in the practicality that it doesn't work out. So here's a map maintained by heritage.org. No, actually, this is just from Wikipedia. That's showing in the brighter orange, or brighter red, the countries that have been communist in the past. You can see Cuba underneath Florida is red, it's just really thin. And then the marooner red is countries that are still communist today, okay? So it's, and by the way, the countries that were communism, those ideals in some people is still quite strong still. Back in 2001, I think it was, Rebecca and I visited Lithuania for a mission trip, and we met people there. It still looked back then as a communist country. There were still some, you know, World War II era vehicles. There was still the block-style apartments everywhere. And for the younger generation, they were very pro-Western culture, society. But for the older generation, they were like, I liked it when people just fed me. And you know, like they liked some aspects of communism, and they were dealing with this generational divide. And so, you know, communism, even in those post-communist countries, isn't fully dead. All right, so let's see, Marxism as an economic thought, maybe that's been defeated, okay? Maybe that's more or less done with. But Marxism as a cultural movement, it seems to really be picking up some wind. And so cultural Marxism is really what this sermon is about, which is a term I couldn't even have said it last week. Like I got it, had a feel for it, but I didn't have a name for it. Cultural Marxism is alive and well, and it really has a two-pronged approach to success today. One is to pose or to utilize what seems to be social injustices as a platform for promoting Marxism, and the other is cultural relativism. If you remember last week, I had one slide where I talked about cultural relativism, where it's like whatever the society deems as being their moral relativism, what is morally acceptable, that becomes kind of the standard for the culture, and that is how cultural Marxism now can use that to spread more Marxist ideas. Here's a kind of a long quote from an article called How Cultural Marxism Threatens the United States and How Americans Can Fight It. It's by Mike Gonzalez and Catherine Gorka. The United States has successfully confronted Marxist attempts to derail it from its historic path of liberty and order. Okay, so freedom and the West won, right? The multifaceted effort to defeat the enemy, generally referred to as the Cold War, concentrated many of the best minds in the country. In 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved, many Americans and others around the globe justifiably believed that communism had been defeated. That's where I was. However, American Marxists, making use of the complacency that victory often produces, have gained more influence than ever before. Cloaking their goals under the pretense of social justice, now they seek to dismantle the foundations of the American Republic by rewriting history, by reintroducing racism, by creating privileged classes, and determining what can be said in public discourse, in the military, and in houses of worship. Unless Marxist thought is defeated again, today's cultural Marxists will achieve what the Soviet Union never could. Get this? The subjugation of the United States to a totalitarian, soul-destroying ideology. Subjugation means to make a servant of, right? To make us submissive to this, as they call it, the soul-destroying ideology. What we looked at the early part of Marx's life, that is the outcome given the path that the cultural Marxists want to see happen. Okay? So we'll look at social justice, and we'll look at cultural relativism just a little bit here. And by the way, those two things in themselves are oxymoronic. How can you claim that there's a social injustice that you're going to harp on in a culture that is relativist, right? Because personal moral relativism says that everything is valid, everything can be true. What could be true for you doesn't have to be true for me. But as a culture, I guess, on average, what do people believe? And let's use that to levy against or to claim what things are socially unjust. All right, so I started all of this. This is probably the first slide I wrote, I don't know, a month ago. I started all of this thinking that I was going to focus on wokeism. And as I was researching it, the term woke and the meaning of woke originally, I think, was actually very good. The purpose was good. It was to become awake, to be awakened to social injustice, especially in the area of racial prejudice, racism, right? And so for the people that use woke in that term to alert people of racial prejudice and discrimination, I'm okay with that kind of wokeism. That there's no room for that in our society or in our church, right? Micah 6:8 says that God has shown you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And so we want to be just and merciful with each other as an expression of worship to our God. But wokeism has come to kind of like be an umbrella for a whole bunch of things, which I'm not okay with. And so for the most part, I would say I'm anti-woke, because it includes things like critical race theory, which we're going to talk about, which says that inherently our system is racist. Inherently our systems are sexist. That we should have fluid gender identity, just as we've said that racism should be abolished, so should sexism, or sexism should be abolished. So should this idea that you're born with a gender, right? That can be fluid. There's going to be a whole other sermon on that in the future. And that capitalism, where you have the haves and the have-nots, is flawed and unjust. Okay, so this idea is rearing its head again today. You know, why should this person be able to have such a large amount of wealth and live so comfortably while their neighbor maybe, or someone in a different part of town, is struggling paycheck to paycheck, living by poverty, doesn't have insurance, all these things, right? That's unjust, is what wokeism says. That's where socialism starts to come into play. All right, so critical race theory comes from critical theory. And here's what's important to know about this, is that critical theory was developed by people who studied Marxism, okay? Critical theory was formalized in the 1920s and 30s they originally started out in a place called Frankfurt Institute for Social Research, Frankfurt being in Germany. And they relocated themselves as a result of World War II to Columbia University. They up and left and came over to the United States and started implanting those Marxist thoughts into our highest level of academia in the United States, okay, 100 years ago. So here's some overall properties of critical theory in general. That a critical theory has to be explanatory, that it can explain why there's some type of injustice. It has to be practical, so there has to be something that they can do to help correct that injustice. And then it has to be normative, meaning that it's something that we want to be done on a large scale. And those things by itself, you know, thinking critically and thinking about problems and thinking about solutions, that's all great. There's nothing wrong necessarily with critical theory, except that critical theory, because it's Marxist in its origination, relies very heavily on conflict theory. which we already looked at. It relies very heavily on this idea that there are people that have or that are, I want to say the word blessed, but who are, what's the word I'm looking for? Affluent, maybe, and then there's people that aren't, okay? And there's a conflict between them. So this is a better breakdown of what a critical theory is. Evaluate a society according to some idealistic standard. When critical theory was being created, or rather when Marxism was being created, they were looking at the Marxist standard of that flat, classless society. Identify injustices. Identify the forces that are maintaining those injustices. Identify what can be taken to remediate those injustices. Okay? And this is what I was trying to say. In the 1930s, the idealistic standard for being used was Marxism, as they were coming up with critical theories, which focused on materialism, classism, and social conflict. How can we get rid of those things? Now, advance forward to 1970s in the creation of the critical race theory that says that our laws, our policies, our civic groups, our systems of government, they must be torn down because these are the powers that are in play that are oppressing people so that they can be rebuilt on an unbiased foundation. And here we can see that in Marxism. This is a quote from Karl Marx, that law, morality, religion are to him, so are to the bourgeoisie prejudices, the people in power, behind which lurk an ambition just as many as the bourgeoisie interests. Okay, so they're saying that the class that is in power, they use these things, law, morality, religion, in order to serve their interests. They create the system, and the system serves them, is what he's trying to say. So we see that very clearly, a Marxist thought. We see that very clearly all the way now in critical race theory, which was formally developed in the 1980s. This law, morality, and religion has become to be known by the term the robes. You have your judges, you have professors, and you have pastors who typically have some level of acceptance of power, of influence within communities. And so therefore they are all instruments used by that upper class to enforce the system that keeps the oppressed down. Okay? So that's what it's trying to say. So critical race theory then is applying that system of identifying injustices and how to resolve them to the area of racism. And critical race theory says that it is inherent both within people and in the institutions that racism will always exist. Okay, it is most likely permanent, and therefore we need to begin to recognize it in our systems, but also to a certain level just accept it. So there's Brookings Institute, which is actually wrote a paper called Why Are States Banning CRT? And this is actually a pro-CRT document here. It says that CRT does not attribute racism to white people as individuals or even to entire groups of people. Simply put, CRT uses that U.S. social institutions, justice systems, education systems, labor market, housing market, healthcare system are laced with racism embedded in their laws, regulations, and rules and procedures that lead to differential outcomes by race. Sociologists and other scholars have long noted that racism can exist without racists. Okay, but however, many Americans are not able to separate their individual identity from these social institutions that govern us, and therefore perceive themselves as part of the system, and so therefore they interpret what CRT is saying as calling them racist personally. The part that really bothers me here is the part where it says that racism can continue to exist without racists. Does that bother anybody else? especially in a government where we claim that we are, we the people, that the government is by us and for us, right? Not bias, B-A-S, but by us, B-Y-U-S, that because we make up these institutions, as long as we are not racist, then racism should die. That makes sense to me. Not that it will always be inherent to all of these systems and all part of our life. And if CRT is successful in claiming that it will always be part of our systems and therefore we always need to address it, then we are creating a reverse racism, okay? So the father of CRT, that's what I'm calling him, I don't know if anybody else calls him that. In the 1970s, there was a professor at Harvard named Derek Bell. He explored what it would mean to understand racism as a permanent feature of American life. In one of his books, he wrote, "There is satisfaction in the struggle itself, a salvation through the struggle." Now, on one hand, I can kind of understand if he's feeling like, slavery was abolished in the 1850s, 60s, and yet all the way in the 1980s in his time, he's still seeing social injustice, he's still seeing racism and preferential treatment, then I can kind of understand where he's coming from, that maybe it's something we just need to accept. But on the other hand, to use the phrase that there's salvation in the struggle, that doesn't sit well with me, right? That says there is no solution and we should just accept that as our salvation in working in the struggle. Here's a classic hypothetical example that gets brought up with critical race theory. It says, say you're a shop owner and two guys enter the store at the same time. One of them is black and one of them is white. If you go to help the black guy first, critical race theory would say, well, you're going to help him first because you inherently believe you can't trust him. There's some part of you where you think that he might steal, right? Or if you go to help the white guy first, it's because you're giving him preferential treatment. So it's like, it's a double standard, but also it puts you, this critical race theory puts you into a no-win situation where it's always going to be one or the other, and it can never be you're just truly not racist and it's just, totally 50-50 random. All right, so cultural Marxism, it's using these social injustice issues like racism, and as we're going to get to in future sermons, like sexuality. And it's also using cultural relativism, which again lends itself to that sexuality discussion, to create socialism to destroy capitalism. These progressions just keep coming up. This progression of thought, progression of development, progression of belief. So social justice combined with cultural relativism can be applied not only to the oppressive white male, the majority historically in the United States, but it can actually, through cultural relativism, be applied to whatever the dominant class is in that social context. And in general, we can say that the dominant class would be the white heterosexual male born in America, able-bodied and handsome. Okay? And we lump those things in together into a new term, which I could not have said this week. Again, I knew that something like this existed, but I didn't know the word, called a hegemonic class. There's a hegemony here. The ruling power, this is really just a new term for the bourgeoisie. Okay, this is the Marxist culture relabeling what was called the bourgeoisie, a new term, the hegemonic class, that is the people that are keeping these oppressive systems in play to serve themselves and to oppress the others. Okay? And so cultural relativism and really cultural Marxism is saying that because there are people who are not heterosexual, who are not white, who are not male, who are not born in the United States, that group, that hegemonic class has to be torn down so that we can create a new and fair society. okay? Not only that, but to the extent that you are not those things, you're not in that hegemonic class, if you have overlapping areas, you know, if you're not only a male, but you're also, so if you're a female and you're heterosexual, then you are outside of the hegemonic class in more than one category, then it's like there's something called intersectionalism that says those oppressive classes intersect, and they have a nonlinear effect on the way that you're oppressed. It's like you're more oppressed, not just by a linear count, but also a geometric count, okay? You become more oppressed. All of these things, this mentality to overthrow the hegemonic class, to overthrow the affluent class, the successful class, in order to create a more fair and classless society, all of this, in my opinion, really reeks of reverse racism, and it's got diversity, equity, and inclusion written all over it. In the name of being more accepting, in the name of getting almost like reparations, or, you know, making up for lost time, lost inequalities, past inequalities, we're going to create programs and policies in order to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, please hear me on this, that the kingdom of heaven will consist of every tribe and every tongue, and it's going to be a beautiful picture of people worshiping God in harmony with every language. But that's going to happen naturally as hearts are changed, not because it was mandated by some policy that we have to let in, you know, X percent of this and Y percent of that in order to meet our quotas, in order to claim that we are diverse and fair. Okay? Does that make sense? By the way, this hegemonic class, that can very easily be conveyed to someone and pronounced a lot easier just by saying, the man. The man is oppressing us. It's all the man's fault. We're just serving the man. Well, who's the man? According to our society today, it's people who fall into that hegemonic class. Just the fact that all of you recognize the term the man validates the fact that this movement is happening to classify people, right? To put them into the haves and the have-not buckets, right? And the reason I say it's reverse racism is because more than many, I fall into that the man category, right? I've been blessed abundantly. And it's not because I come from rich parents. My parents weren't rich. They were pastors trying to make it, you know. But I am that hetero white male, cisgendered male, a pastor, a robe, right? And so I hope that people that know me would not claim that I'm just part of a system working to keep the hegemonic class in power, right? Hopefully you know me and you say that is just fundamentally not true about you, and therefore it's not fair to create a system that claims that it is. Okay? All right. So I mentioned cultural relativism, and we're going to touch on that more in future sermons on abortionism and omnisexualism and transgenderism. And, I want to say right now about abortionism, I hope that nobody will avoid that topic. I hope that no one will avoid coming to that sermon if you yourself have been affected by abortion. And I'm not just only talking to women out there, I'm also talking to men, because men are equally wounded by abortion. Okay? But that's a topic for next week. Probably next week. Oh, next week is really missionary. Thank you. Y'all are on top of it. I like it. All right, so socialism, we haven't talked too much about that. So what does socialism have to do with that? And isn't it different from communism? And aren't we socialists and all that kind of stuff? So socialism is basically saying that we want to give the government or the state control of the means of production so that it's handled well, so that there's no monopolies, so that there's no jacking up of prices, that kind of stuff. And that we want to redistribute that wealth. Well, we're giving the state the power to do that, but we hope that it's being done fairly so that everybody benefits, right? That's basically what socialism says. There's still private ownership, there's still freedoms, but we're turning more and more of it over to the government in order to be fair and equitable. So economic disparity, it leads to a working class, into, well, I should say a successful, and then those who are in that proletariat struggling to survive. But that proletariat then they're going to be advocating in support of a government that's going to give them free education, free critical needs, things they need, free health care, or controlling the agriculture, more welfare, more social services. And they're going to see that those who have affluence, those things easily, they're going to say, well, why it's unjust that they get all those things and I don't. And so socialism seeks to redistribute that. It's unfortunate that Joel walked out the door. I just read one of his books called The Strong Man. It's a Tuttle Twins books, where it gives an example of a strong man in a circus, and he leaves the circus because he's not being compensated enough by the owner, the circus ringmaster, I guess. And some of the people in the circus don't mind that he's gone because he was paid more than the others, and he was getting some special treatment, like a special diet and some physical training, some athletic training, that kind of stuff. And they were like, we didn't need him anyway, and he was too expensive, and he always thought that he was so important. But actually what they found out was that the circus didn't do well without him. They weren't selling as many tickets. They were worried they were going to have to start letting more people go. You get that downward spiral of economy when you start losing profit. And so I think the ringmaster convinces him to come back to the circus, and he actually uses his special ability to save the circus physically, like there was an accident that happens, and he uses his strength to save people from dying. And so all the circus realize, wow, he wasn't just putting on an act. He is legitimately strong, and he was legitimately important to what we do here as the circus, and therefore maybe he does legitimately deserve to be paid more. And so that's the whole idea of capitalism, and what Elon Musk has started to coin a meritocracy, that you should be paid and you should be successful in life depending on your merits. A meritocracy is how capitalism and the free economy works, is that if you're able to make it by pulling up yourself by the bootstraps and provide a better product at a lower price, or get that skilled job because you worked hard in school or because you trained really hard physically, then you deserve to make it. And that's the bottom line in our economy. Socialism has been tried in many places in our world, and very recently, 3 countries in particular. Let me find my notes here. In England, Israel, and India, they all officially became a socialist country, and then went away from it when they realized how much of a disaster it was. The British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, has a quote saying, "The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money." In these socialist countries, it's not uncommon for the wealthy to be charged greater than 50% on tax, so they can pay for all the social programs, including health care, for all the other people that can't afford it. They don't make enough income for themselves. So it actually causes that downward spiral in their economies as well, because if the wealthy are no longer able to run their businesses, earn profit and redistribute that to others, then those other individuals have to end up suffering as well. Giving the government more power always results in an abuse of power and a loss of freedoms. This has just been proven time and time again throughout history, and it's what we're looking at as a nation as we turn more and more power and more dollars over to the government to redistribute to the people. Heritage.org is a fabulous website. They do a lot of research and have tons of graphs. You'd be proud of me, I didn't put a single graph in this chart. Okay, that shows, one of the things they have is an economic freedom index that shows that the more free their economy is, the more, I'm not finding the right word today. Let's just say, the higher the GDP, yes, but the more successful that country is in a number of dimensions, not just GDP, but their overall health is better. Their overall environment is better. It's cleaner, right? Their education is higher. Gross domestic product is the GDP. But it's not just financially that economic freedom benefits the people. It's in every category of life, essentially, that they end up doing better. And why is that? It's because the free market drives competition, which drives down price, which drives up quality, right? Heritage.org also says that in every country where socialism has tried, it's been a failure, or they're facing tough economic times currently. Okay, there is no utopia out there just because they went to socialism. Okay, so I haven't talked about much Bible today. I want us to take away 3 things from this, okay? So I've got about 3 more slides here. Number 1, that Uncle Sam cannot be our savior. We cannot expect Uncle Sam to fulfill all the roles that we ourselves or we as a church should be fulfilling. Yes, we should pay taxes. Yes, we should support our government and our leaders in government. No, we should not give them more power to do things that we should be doing ourselves. So when Jesus said, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's, yes, that's not, in my opinion, that's not only financially, that's also in their roles and responsibilities. So give the government the role of protecting us, right? Give the government the role of making sure that we are civil and safe, right? But give to God the role of being the caretaker and the providers for the widows and the orphans, right? To educate, even to give health care. Like the hospitals of our nation were primarily founded by organizations that were faith-based, Christian groups, right? And now they're regulated out the wazoo about how they have to do that. It becomes less and less profitable. Doctors can't do their job the way they want to do it. You know, the healthcare goes down. All right. This is crazy to me. In a 2017 survey done by YouGov, 51% of those polled under the age of 30 said they preferred to live in either a socialist or a communist nation. 51%. Only 33% of those polled could even really properly define what socialism meant. So basically, they're the child of Bernieism, right? That all these promises being made by our government leaders saying, we're going to fix all your problems, and we're going to make it fair for everybody, and we're going to increase your minimum wage, and we're going to give you free education, and we're going to do da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But they have not lived in that society down the road where the money is sucked dry. And now you end up with bread lines, right? And now you end up with rationing, coupons, all this stuff that we've seen and we've been through, and we've seen it happen in grotesque measures, even in recent histories like in North Korea. Venezuela is going through it right now. Venezuela is being overrun by crime because the government can't do it. All right, so trust in God as our Savior, not in Uncle Sam. It is a sin for us to abdicate our responsibilities as followers of Christ. And real quickly, what are some of those responsibilities? Work is one of them. We were called in the Garden of Eden to be workers, to work the garden, and we're repeatedly called, even in Acts, where it says to care for one another, take care of each other, be sure that none is without need, right? And that's referring to within the body of Christ. But in order to do that, Paul says in 2 Thessalonians, he said, he who is unwilling to work, they shouldn't eat. That is not popular in today's American society, where people go on to some type of support check or stamps, and they have no incentive to get off of it. I don't know how many times I've heard that. Well, if I started working, I wouldn't get my support check anymore. Who's paying for that support check? Me? You? It's not the way we weren't designed to be like that, and we were not intended by our social welfare program in America to be that, okay? Jenny, here's my call out to Tan Stoffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That was in a book we read. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. There might be now, for a while, for you, but that's not necessarily going to be there in the future because we can't support it. And we can't support it as hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants come into our country. They're going to expect the same treatment because, hey, it's fair. All right. Next is we should be caring for the orphans and the widows. James 1:27. Religion that God accepts as pure and holy. If this is all you do in your faith, do this. Care for the widows and orphans. Okay? Keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So yes, we should be in politics. Yes, we should be politically active, and we should take that ability to vote with a responsibility to vote. But we should also be living out our faith and not just saying the government's going to take care of it. And then lastly, yes, we have a call to care for the poor. The king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for the one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Yes, we should be about social welfare, but it should be out of our own hearts and our own pocketbooks, not out of the government's pocketbook. Again, not popular in today's culture. We want to help people. Personally, we give. The church gives. You give. There is a limit to what we can do, but on a worldwide scale, there is so much that we could be doing. And let me back up a step. We're coming up on something called Stand Sunday, which is a day that the church wants to elevate awareness of foster care and adoption opportunities. And there's something like 10,000 kids in the foster care system in Texas right now. But I forget the number. There are far more churches than that in Texas. And if every church would have one family that would adopt one child, now of course oftentimes you have to adopt a sibling group, but that just knocks the problem out faster. If you have every church with one family who would say yes to foster care, the foster care system problem would go away. People would not be overworked. The state would not be over budget, right? And more importantly, legacies of families can be changed. And that has an economic impact that is really hard to measure. When we were in Arizona doing foster care, they would say that every $1 spent in prevention, meaning on at-risk families, saves $17 because you don't have to do all the social programs or incarceration for those children when they grow up. That is a huge return on investment that they were looking at from a government point of view, but we should be looking at from a personal faith point of view and making a difference in today's world. All right, stand with me, please. Can you have the next slide, please? Or I can do it. No, I can't do it. Next slide, please. Here's the discussion questions which you can talk about on your way home, talk about in your life group, talk about with a neighbor over coffee, I don't know, whatever. Have you seen socialism on the rise in our country today? To see the mindset of Marxism, again, the leveling of the playing field, the haves, the have-nots, and in our church. I didn't talk very much about how it has been influencing our church, but that the DEI mindset is very pervasive. And I just want to say again, there's nothing sinful about being affluent. Just because you have done well in life, that can be the blessing of God. That can be the result of your hard work. It doesn't mean that that you are inherently sinful or that you deserve to be taken down. Okay? How do we lovingly respond to a world that seeks to reject our God? Remember, Marxism in the beginning was about not just taking down the middle class, it was about taking down God in society, and that everything that was created deserves to be destroyed. Not acceptable. All right, Father God, thank you for this time. Lord, I pray that some small part of it would find a home in our hearts, God, that we would begin to look at the social structures and the agendas in our society with wide eyes open to these things, so that we can stand up for freedom, so that we can stand up for what we have already seen to be the source of prosperity, which is economic freedom. And God, most of all, that we as believers would take it upon ourselves the responsibility and the duties to do the things that we've just seen in James 1:27 and Matthew 25:40. God, that through us in Genesis 12:2, you called us to be a blessing to every nation and family on the earth. Through us. And so, Lord, I pray that we would take that call to action seriously, and that we would stand up for what's right, and most of all, God, that we would stand up for you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, we pray that it would be so. I bless each and one of you as you go. Love you very much.